It's estimated that by the winter of 1914, over 1 million soldiers had already lost their lives in the Great War, a conflict that would eventually claim the lives of 17 million people. The once green fields of France and Belgium had become a frozen, muddy expanse of trenches, where soldiers on both sides huddled in the cold, awaiting their turn to face the horrors of no man's land. For the British Expeditionary Force, the first few months of the war had been a baptism by fire, as they struggled to hold back the German tide. The introduction of trench warfare had brought a new level of brutality to the conflict, with both sides dug in for the long haul. As the winter of 1914 set in, the men on both sides of the trenches were facing their first Christmas away from home, with no end to the fighting in sight. The mood was grim, with many believing that the war would be won or lost in the spring. But despite the dire circumstances, a sense of unease was beginning to creep over the battlefield, a feeling that something was not quite right. As Christmas approached, a strange and unexpected phenomenon began to take hold, one that would bring a fleeting moment of peace to the trenches, and change the course of the war forever. As the days shortened and the nights grew colder, the soldiers on both sides of the trenches found themselves increasingly on edge, their nerves frayed by the constant bombardment and the ever-present threat of death. The British Expeditionary Force, still reeling from the devastating losses of the autumn, were struggling to maintain their morale, as the reality of the war's true nature began to sink in. The Germans, too, were feeling the strain, their initial advances having been halted, but at great cost in lives and resources. The trenches, once seen as a temporary solution, had become a permanent fixture, a grim reminder of the war's stalemate. As Christmas loomed, the soldiers' thoughts turned to home, to families and loved ones, to the warmth and comfort of a season that had once brought joy and laughter. But here, in the frozen mud of no man's land, there was only the cold, harsh reality of war. The guns, though quieter than in the autumn, still boomed and crackled, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the parapet. And yet, despite the tension, despite the fear, a sense of restlessness was beginning to build, a feeling that something was about to break, that the fragile equilibrium of the trenches was on the verge of collapse. The question was, what would be the spark that set it off? It was December 24th, Christmas Eve, and the British and German soldiers were settling in for what they expected to be another long and grueling night in the trenches. But as the darkness deepened, a strange and wondrous thing began to happen. Along the front lines, from the Swiss border to the Belgian coast, a series of small, tentative gestures began to take place. A British soldier, his voice barely above a whisper, started to sing a Christmas carol. The words, familiar and comforting, drifted across no man's land, a gentle challenge to the darkness. And then, incredibly, a German voice joined in, the two men singing in harmony, their words overlapping and intertwining like the threads of a rich tapestry. The sound was like nothing anyone had ever heard before, a beautiful, haunting melody that seemed to capture the very essence of the season. As the singing grew louder, more voices began to join in, British and German soldiers alike, their differences momentarily forgotten in the face of a shared humanity. The guns, for a moment, fell silent, as if the music had somehow managed to still the very hearts of the combatants. It was a fleeting moment, a brief, shining instant of peace in the midst of war. And yet, it was enough to set in motion a chain of events that would change the course of the war, if only for a day. As the music swelled, a sense of wonder began to spread, like a slow-moving tide, along the battle-scarred trenches. Soldiers on both sides, emboldened by the singing, started to emerge from their hiding places, their eyes scanning the darkness for signs of movement. It was a perilous moment, a moment when the fragile truce could have shattered, leaving the combatants to return to their killing ways. But instead, something miraculous happened. A German soldier, his helmet held aloft in a gesture of peace, stepped out of the shadows and into no man's land. He was followed, hesitantly at first, by a British soldier, who mirrored the German's gesture. And then, as if drawn by some unseen force, more soldiers began to emerge, their footsteps quiet on the frozen earth. The air was heavy with tension, the silence between the soldiers a palpable thing. But as they looked at one another, something remarkable occurred, a spark of recognition, a glimmer of understanding that these men, these enemies, were not so different after all. They were, like the soldiers who sang, human beings, bound together by a shared experience, a shared suffering. And as this realization dawned, the soldiers began to move towards one another, their footsteps slow, their eyes locked in a tentative, yet profound, connection. As the soldiers drew closer, the tension began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of wonder and curiosity. They regarded one another warily at first, unsure of how to react, but as they looked into each other's eyes, they saw not the enemy, but fellow human beings, weary, worn, and desperate for peace. The Germans, with their spiked helmets and imposing uniforms, seemed less intimidating now, their faces creased with fatigue, their eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. The British, with their khaki tunics and stern expressions, appeared equally vulnerable, their eyes haunted by the memories of the past few months. As they stood there, the silence between them began to fill with the sounds of murmured conversation, the exchange of cigarettes and chocolate, and the hesitant smiles that creased their faces. It was a moment of profound connection, a moment that transcended the boundaries of language and nationality, a moment that reminded them that, despite the hatred and the bloodshed, they were not so different after all. The soldiers, emboldened by this newfound understanding, began to mingle, to exchange stories, and to share what little they had. It was a fleeting moment of peace, a moment that would be lost in the chaos of the war to come, but for now, it was enough. As the night wore on, the soldiers continued to fraternize, their laughter and conversation carrying across no man's land, a beacon of hope in a world gone mad. As the night of Christmas 1914 slowly gave way to the dawn of a new day, the soldiers knew that their fleeting moment of peace was drawing to a close. The officers, who had been noticeably absent from the truce, began to reassert their authority, and the men were reluctantly ordered back to their trenches. The Germans and British parted ways, but not before exchanging gifts, addresses, and promises to meet again, if fate would allow it. The Christmas truce of 1914 was a moment of profound beauty, a moment that would be etched in the memories of those who experienced it, and a moment that would haunt the imagination of the world for generations to come. But it was also a moment of tragic futility, a moment that would be crushed by the very machinery of war that it had momentarily halted. As the soldiers returned to their duties, they knew that they would soon be called upon to resume the killing, and that the memories of their Christmas truce would be forever tainted by the horrors that were to come. And yet, even in the face of such overwhelming futility, the Christmas truce of 1914 remains a powerful testament to the human spirit, reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility for peace, for connection, and for transcendence.